Nice. Okay. Okay, so we'll start. Let me get my other screen up. Okay. All right, so as per the class title, we're going to be doing somewhat of an in-depth, obviously limited because we only have 25 minutes or so of the 10 Commandments. Okay, so 10 Commandments, big thing in Judaism apparently, right? So we have to understand why, understand where does this idea, first of all, of the 10 come in, where does the commandments come in, and why do we even pay so much attention to this? But before we could do that, we actually need to do a quick review of what the 10 Commandments are. And before we do that, I need to put this on the side so I can see my thing here. Here we go. So, at first glance, the way we have the 10 Commandments organized, which is essentially the way I have it in front of you here, that's how you see it when it's, portrayed on the side of shuls and on letterheads, et cetera, it doesn't really make much sense. And we're going to have to explain why it is the way it is, but let's just run through it quickly. First commandment apparently is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, right? So that's not really much of a commandment. Okay. Second commandment is, you shall not have any other gods before me. And then as you see in the smaller print, there's several other pisukim that follow after, which are expanding on that basic principle. Number 3 is, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Okay, and as you see at the end in the small print, again, there's somewhat of a continuation on that. 4th is remembering the Shabbat and making it holy. And then as you see again in the small, there's a very long continuation there detailing who's obligated and what the purpose of keeping Shabbat is. 5 is honor your father and your mother, or respect your father and mother. And then on the other half, or on the other side of the tablets, we have 5 commandments, which are much shorter, as you could see, much more direct. There's no parentheses, there's no expansion. It's just no murder, no adultery, no stealing, or it really is kidnapping in this instance. Lo ta'aneh b're'acha et shaker, do not testify falsely against your friend. And the 10th one is, do not covet, do not desire someone else's things. So these are the 10. This is how we have it broken down. And first question I want to address is, who cares? What I mean by that is, we have 613 commandments in the Torah. We believe that the entire Torah is divine. It's all from God. So why do we have such a thing as the 10 commandments? Why do we even prioritize them or speak about them any differently than any other commandment in the Torah? So the truth is that it's not just us, but the Gemara in Masechet Brachot mentions that in the Bet HaMikdash, amongst the things that they used to say in the prayer of Shacharit, they would actually read the 10 commandments as part of the prayer. Just like we read Shema, they would read also the Aseret HaDiberot. And at the end here it says, Amar Rav Yehuda in the bold, Amar Rav Yehuda, second line, Amar Shmuel, Af begivulin bikshu lekrotken. They wanted to institute this across the board, all across the nation of Israel, that after you say Shema, you would also say the Aseret HaDiberot, or before Shema actually, you would say the Aseret HaDiberot, the 10 commandments, and then you would continue, and then you would pray the Amidah. But it would be a formal part of the Tefillah. Why don't we do that? How come today we don't do that? He says, Shekvar bitilum, they nullified this practice, mipnei taromet haminin, because what was happening was that people were coming along and saying, oh, you know why they put the 10 commandments in the prayer? Because that's really the essence. That's really the most important part. That's really the only part of Judaism that you need to keep. Everything else is, bonus. This was the claim of many of the early Christians as well, that, certain commandments were more fundamental than others, and therefore you could really do away with a lot of the other commandments. And so they said, you know what? It's better not to include it in the Tefillah, better not to include it, because it's going to lead to people and coming to wrong conclusions. So they got rid of it. But you see from here that the idea that keeping giving a quote unquote priority to the 10 commandments is something that they wanted to do. And despite this Gemara, the Maharshal, Rabbi Shlomo Luria, one of the great rabbis of the 17th century, actually writes that he had the custom, and he encouraged everyone to have the custom to read in private, not as part of the formal tefillah, but in private, to read the 10 commandments every day. In some communities, there's a minhag in when the parashiot of the Ten Commandments come around in their cycle, in the the yearly cycle, that everyone in the community stands up for that aliyah in which the Ten Commandments are read. The Rambam didn't like this custom at all because of the above Gemara. He says you're prioritizing one part of Torah over another, and that's not good. But this minhag is still pretty prevalent. And nowadays, what we do to, placate the Rambam as well as to maintain the custom is that they usually send up the rabbi for that aliyah, so that even though everyone's standing, they're standing for the rabbi, not necessarily to indicate that they are prioritizing one piece of Torah over the other. But my point in bringing this up is that you see that in general, we do care, meaning we don't just say it's all from God, there's no difference, right? It happens to be something about the Ten Commandments, which are so fundamental, that makes them stand out. And the last piece is that what we have, we have a custom on Shabuot called Azharot, which are basically poems that were compiled in the Middle Ages, which detail all of the 613 commandments. They basically, in poetry form, list 613 commandments, and a lot of times they'll actually use the 10 commandments as their base to get to all the mitzvot. And the fundamental assumption is that within the 10 commandments are really all 613 mitzvot. And when you think about the 10 commandments, you could probably very easily see how that's the case, right? There's plenty of commandments against avodah zarah. There's plenty of commandments against theft. There's plenty of commandments against jealousy and coveting, and et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about some misconceptions that we have about the 10 commandments, and then we'll look at the 10 commandments in the next slide from perhaps a different perspective. So the first misconception I think we have is that there are 10 commandments. I've been using that expression this entire time as a setup for this misconception, if we're being honest, but there's not 10 commandments. If we just go back very easily, we can see that there's a lot more than 10 commandments. If you look in number 2, after it says, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acharim apanai, the next pasuk says, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel, don't make for yourself a statue. And then the next one says, Lo tishtachaveh lahem, and the next word says, V'lo ta'avdem. Those are all considered separate mitzvot. So depending on how many mitzvot you count here, some hold 12, some hold 13. According to Rasag, who's Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon, really all the 613 commandments are included here. So there's really not 10. Why do we say 10? Where does this number 10 come from? So it actually comes from Moshe's retelling of the events in Sefer Devarim. When Moshe retells of the events that happened on Har Sinai, he says, you heard Aseret HaDevarim, the 10, and now here comes the tricky word. He doesn't say commandments, he says Devarim. The word Devarim, the word davar in Hebrew can relate to the word, right? The word, a davar, but it could also be a matter or a thing, right? Davar can be a thing. So Moshe calls it Aseret HaDevarim, the 10 utterances or the 10 sayings or the 10 things. And essentially by calling it that, Moshe is making a point that there are two components to the 10 utterances. One is what they actually said, the commandments given over, the do's and the don'ts, what the content of the revelation was. But the other piece, which we don't stress as much, is the fact of revelation or the experience of the revelation. Meaning, when I heard the voice, anytime you hear someone's voice, there's the fact that you hear something from the other person, and then there's the content of what they actually said. So too on Har Sinai, there's the experience of the revelation, the fact that we heard some voice, there was some experience of a sound, but then there was also the content of the actual revelation, what was actually said. And that is combined in the word Devarim. The word Devarim can contain both of those meanings. Another misconception that we have is that there's one set of 10 commandments, but in fact, the 10 commandments, or we'll call them the 10 Devarim, is mentioned in Parashat Yitro, which is in Sefer Shemot, in the as chronologically it happened. And then it's also mentioned again in Sefer Devarim, Parashat Vayechanan, when Moshe again retells of the story. And over there, he gives, whether it's a different version or whether one represents the first tablets and one represents the second tablets, whether or not one is what God said, and this is Moshe's interpretation of to the people. It's, the tablets say what they say, but Moshe is telling them an additional meaning of what they say, different interpretations. But it's important to keep in mind that we always see this, we always see this, right? And we always get this in our schools. This is the Yitro, the Shemot version, but in fact there are substantial differences. I mean, not huge ones, but important ones that occur in. Someone wrote in the chat. I see, maybe potentially. Let's check what that says. Spoiler. Oh, sorry, Ron Dog. Fine. So another misconception that we have is that they are split up evenly. Meaning what? If we go back here, right, we see 5 and 5, and we ought to always think, and we're always taught that, Ben Adam Lamakom on one side, from man to God on one side, those are the mitzvot on the right side, we'll call it, and on the left side is the mitzvot between man and man. And we're going to work with this breakdown in the next slide, but what's important to keep in mind is that if you just look at it, it doesn't make much sense, right? I mean, look at the asymmetry here. You have, hundreds of words on the right side and maybe, 20 words on the left side. Think about the tablets right now, right? Was it going to be like this and like this? They didn't have the PowerPoint, to sort of align it like I did, change the font size. Maybe they did change the font size. Who knows? But the point is that we always assume that it's like this, but it's not necessarily the case, because according to some people, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first one is not one. It's not one of the count. It's not one of the. It's the introduction to the count. In which case, 1 and 2 becomes. 2 becomes 1 and 2, 3 is the same. That's one interpretation. There's other interpretations that actually go based off of the paragraph breaks in the Torah scroll itself, in the writing itself, in which case 1 and 2 is all 1, and 10 actually gets divided into 2, which is very interesting. That 10 gets, don't covet your friend's house. Next commandment, don't covet his wife, his possessions, right? We don't need to get into all that, why that would be the case, that, do not covet gets 2. But it's important to keep in mind that although this is the standard, a very standard, division, 5 and 5, between man and God and between man and his fellow, that's not, it's not so simple, not so straightforward. The last misconception that we have is something that I just mentioned, is that you have 5 on the right, which are between man and God, and 5 on the left, which are between man and his fellow. Obviously, the beautiful meaning behind that is that they're the same, right? The meaning they're equal. There's not, you can't prioritize one over the other. They're essentially, completely symmetrical. However, if we look, that's not just simply not true. I mean, look at number 5, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and your mother. That is not really honoring God. Now, obviously, you could homiletically and very nicely say that, well, you're honoring, this is a commandment to honor your parents who created you, and obviously, it's a kal vachomer. It's all the more so that you have to honor God, right? If He created them, who created you, right? And go back ad infinitum. So of course you have to honor your parents. That's also honoring God. But just on a on a simple level, it's not so apparent that the right side is between man and God. So it seems to be that the right side is, instead of saying between man and God, we'll say that the right side represents man in his vertical relationships. Man has, horizontal relationships, and man has vertical relationships. Most of the time, his vertical relationship, at least in the Torah system, is with God, right? Man is here. He looks up towards God. That's a vertical relationship. The terms are dictated, coming from above down. But there's another type of relationship that's a vertical relationship for humanity, and that is the relationship that a person has with his parents, because that's also vertical. The terms are dictated from top below. Whereas on the left side, these are horizontal relationships. Lo tirtzach, do not murder, is something that I have to do, to a fellow who's on the same plane as me. It's not me looking up or me looking down. It's me looking straight ahead, and that's the case with all of them. So we'll divide it instead of ben adam lamakom and ben adam lachavaro to vertical relationships versus horizontal relationships. Now, the last slide, which is something that I heard a while back in a class given by Rabbi David Foreman, is looking at the design or the structure, the architecture of the 10 Commandments or the 10 Divarim, or more exactly of the tablets themselves, and to try and understand meaning based off of that. And right, I put in this quote from Steve Jobs that design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. Obviously very apropos for him, but for us, it's not, we don't really care how it works, we care more about what it means. So what does it mean that you have Anochi Hashem Elokecha, dot, 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 and then directly across from it, as if it's a continuation of the sentence, right? Going right across, right? There's a divider in the middle and you go right across. Lo tirsach, do not murder. And then the next one, you have do not have any other gods, and then you go up to the other side of the, the dividing line, and it's do not commit adultery. And so too all the way down. What could we learn from that? Is there any, meaning towards that? And I think we could say that there is, and we'll try and understand what each one is. But if we, as a general rule, the ones on the right side, meaning 1 through 5, represent, we'll say, some fundamental idea or a fundamental concept, either about man in his relation to himself, man in his relation to God, or man in, or in any of his vertical relationships. And 6 to 10 represent how that manifests in the real world with his fellow human beings, such that almost 6 through 10 are the natural conclusion of 1 through 5. So let's go through it and we'll see if, we can make this make sense. So the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. And then 6 is, do not murder. Now, the question is, why can't I murder? And the answer is, the Torah says way back in the beginning of the Torah, it says you can't murder because man is created in the image of God, which means to say that every human being has infinite value, not because, we want to, proliferate the species or anything like that, because every human being is created in the image of God. And hence, if you have a correct awareness of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, then lo tirtzach is the natural conclusion of that. It's the way that principle manifests in my interactions with humanity. The same thing with number 2, do not have any other gods before me, translates to not caring about my relationships, not caring about people that have done things for me, not being loyal, me not being faithful. That translates into lo tinaf, do not commit adultery. Do not have any other gods before me is essentially the spiritual equivalent of cheating on God. And so that translates into my, daily interaction as cheating on a spouse, cheating in business, etc., etc. Number 3, do not take the Lord's name in vain. And number 8, which is do not kidnap. Essentially, in Jewish law, we have 2 items that you're not allowed to throw out. You have to bury them. One of them is not really an item. One is the name of God. It has to be buried. You can't get rid of it. You can't dispose of it any other way. You can't burn it. It has to be buried. And the other one is a human body. And so here we have someone who's looking to take something which should be buried because of its sanctity, because of its holiness, and he's using it for his own personal benefit. He's trying to manipulate it. He's trying to take it and usurp it himself for whatever he wants. So it's either in the realm, the spiritual realm of the godly realm, he's taking God's name in vain. He's just taking it and using it how he wants. Whereas in the human realm, that translates into kidnapping. He's taking a human being and using him for his own personal, the holiest thing in the world, a human being, and which is the equivalent of the name of God, because again, man is created in God's image, and he's using it for his own personal benefit. Number 4, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Remember the day of Shabbat and make it holy. And number 9, Lo ta'aneh b'reacha et shaker. Do not testify falsely against your friend. These essentially come together because what is Shabbat? If we, I had instead of the dot, 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 I had the whole continuation here. The continuation says, because you have to remember that God created the world in 6 days and decided to rest on the 7th day, which means to say that even in our creative processes, even when we're, doing jobs and making money and, pushing the world forward, there comes a time where you need to just say, enough is enough, stop, and just be, and just let things be. You can't always allow your desire and your chase for more to take over your life. There has to be a point where you are satisfied with the work done and you put down the paintbrush, you put down the chisel, whatever it is you're doing. So too with number 9. A person's going to testify falsely against his friend because he has most likely a desire for money. He wants to steal from the scholar. He doesn't want to have to pay. It's almost as if he's trying to manipulate because he can't let it go. He can't be satisfied with what he has. He always has to do more, to the extent that he's actually willing to, ruin the fabric of society by, creating a society where the person's word means nothing, just because he has this desire to keep acquiring things. The last and final one, perhaps is the deepest one, in my opinion, is kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and your mother, which translates into lo tachmod bet re'echa, do not covet, do not desire, do not have this jealousy towards your friend's house, towards your friend's wife, towards your friend's possessions, and everything your friend has. And the interesting thing is that we don't get to choose our parents. Those are given to us. There's no, you don't get consulted with it beforehand. And yet the Torah is telling you have to honor them. As if to say, you're going to be dealt things in your life. You're going to have a life that's yours. You have to be able to honor that and respect that and say, whatever I have is good. This is what I have, and therefore I have to respect everything that they do for me, all that they give me, because that's what it is. Just because I didn't get to choose it doesn't mean I don't have to respect it and honor it and love it. And yet number 10 tells me how that translates into the world of interpersonal, which is, don't covet your friend's things. That's not yours. That's not meant for you. That's not what you should be looking at. Instead of looking outward and saying, oh, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have that, look inward and say, I do have this, I do have that, and I do have that. And that comes from a person who's willing to even look at the things that he wasn't given, he wasn't consulted on, he was just dealt with. And if a person can have kabed et avicha ve'et imecha on a true level, then there's no way he would come to lo tachmod bet re'echa, to be jealous of others, because he has a realization that my life is my life. It is what it is. The only option I have here is, let me be happy with what I have. Obviously, it's not, you shouldn't, not strive to get more. But the point is, don't look at what other people have and wish that was your life, because you should be happy and respectful of the people who have provided you the life that you have. If you're not respectful towards them, it shows that you don't really appreciate what you have, the life that was given to you. So now that we see the architecture, right, we can see it beautifully how the two halves are really symmetrical, and that it's almost as if in our horizontal relationships, if we master the ideas and the concepts in them, they almost naturally can translate, and we live by them. They can translate into how we conduct ourselves on the horizontal plane towards our fellow humanity. And that's the 10 Commandments in a nutshell. I'm not sure what the time is. I hope I didn't go over. Oh, look at that. We've got 5 minutes to spare. Any questions? Any questions? Look at that. All right. The next class is going to be by Rabbi Sutton in 4 minutes. I highly encourage everyone to go. It's going to be a Q&A of sorts on Shabuot and on COVID-19 and on general other topics, whatever you want, essentially. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Edward.
My pleasure.